Industry and social stratification. Explain the influence of the industry on social stratification. Explain the studies made on occupational status. Explain the criticism of studies based on status congruency. Describe the stratification theory. Explain the criticism regarding stratification theory. Schinder explains social stratification as a division of society into various strata. These strata are further united by a common characteristic. Stratification is a part of social structure and cannot be classified as simple subsystem of society. This stratification is seen in industrial society in a vivid manner. As such, its relationship, its characteristics and chief features can be examined. The earlier industry has influenced every aspect of human life. As such, it has left a greater influence on social stratification. Some scholars argue industrial revolution has intensified social division or segmentation. The two major forms that always existed in society according to Marxist, the proletariat and the aristocracy, got transformed into workers and capitalists. However, with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, the stratification became more exploitative. Other scholars argue that stratification of society is universal necessity. Scholars insisted that stratification was always a part and parcel of the social system. However, the stratification on the basis of birth is what divides the community and can be tagged as being unnatural, but otherwise the stratification which occurs due to the reward few functional occupations offer is a motivating factor for the people in the community. The jobs with higher rewards motivate people to develop their skill and acquire higher degree of professionalism. In this discussion, we will try to read and understand social stratification and its influence on society and how industry influenced stratification. We will go through the criticism made by scholars and studies that were done on the concept. The influence on industry on stratification system. The modern industrial society is stratified into two major forms. They are class and status. There is a vast difference in the definition of both. While class stratifies society on the basis of person's economic position in it, status does not stratify society on that basis. It represents many stages of gradual social upgradation that a person may belong to. Thus, status may be determined by a variety of factors including family background, education, other social achievements as well as economic class. The concept of the class has been greatly studied by Karl Marx in his theory of society. He divided the society into two classes, that of owners, also called capitalists, and those who were non-owners or workers. According to Karl Marx, the history of society is based on the conflict or class struggle between capitalists and workers for the means of production. Similarly, Weber drew attention to the social stratification which erupts from the recognition of status. However, the stratification that we need to study in an industrial society has to be related to social classes. Let's take into account the Marxist view of industrial society. They divided the society into two classes according to the ownership over means of production. First, being the owners or the capitalists class, and the second were the non-owners or working class. The sociologists who accepted this theory accepted the industrial society being divided into two classes, one which had power and the other which does not have power. The study of social stratification by status will not be sufficient if done only on the basis of economic factor. When we deal with components like social esteem and honor, we need to take into account many aspects of society such as consumption of goods, education, family, and many more. However, after saying this, one should also remember that there is always a connection between a person's economic position and his status in society. We know that influence of industry on the society is huge. Similarly, it also has a direct influence on social stratification and the status. Industry influences all the components that we will study to understand status better. A gradual increment in the authority position within the industry will be reflected in a person's social status. As a person gradually rises higher in an industry, his consumption ability increases and he gets to get a better education. There have been 3 studies to know whether stratification of society must be done on the basis of class or status. In 1958, David Lockwood, in his research on the black-coated worker, found that class position can be easily understood by differentiating material rewards that a worker gained from the market and his work condition from the symbolic rewards he derived from his social status. Lockwood studied the clerks of Britain and found that such white-collar workers identified with proletariat class due to their manual nature of work. It was not because of income but because of similar work situation which led them to identify with working class. Next study was done by Goldthorpe and Lockwood in 1963 on affluent workers at Britain. During 1960, there was a belief that there have been embourgeoisement of section of the working class. This meant that a section of the working class was not only rising in social stratum but were growing influential and powerful or affluent. The study suggested that class was a structural concept and concluded that despite the economic progress of the working class, their real income remained low. There still existed a vast gulf between the middle class and the working class. The study refuted the embourgeoisment thesis and pointed out that workers were yet driven by economic goal. The third study was done by Prandy in 1965 and he studied the scientists and engineers while understanding the social stratification. He suggested that those who enjoyed authority and power accepted the status view. The people who enjoyed power believed that they were part of graded hierarchy, but those who had no power or did not exercise authority followed the class stratification of society. Till now, we studied how industry or occupation influenced the stratification. It has also been seen that at times the social status enjoyed by an individual helps him to get privileged occupational role. Similar to the status group that exists in society, within the industry there are an ever-existing hierarchical levels of authority. Inequality of working condition is one of the features seen in the different levels of authority. This can be termed as the existence of stratification within an industry. The cause for such stratification can be many. Few scholars believe by virtue of technical expertise, the people occupying the position of managers are allowed to reap greater reward from their position. However, critics highlight the devastating penalty of such stratification within industry, which ultimately results in the failure of communication between various strata. According to the study of Clement in 1958, a system of social differentiation exists within the industries. Workers also showed that status concern was one of the features among them as well. However, in recent studies, it has been proved that the status of work life does not affect the social status, as workers do not carry the mark of their occupation in non-work life. From one of the studies made by Tannebaum and his colleagues, it has been further seen that participation of workers in decision-making activity can minimize the effect of hierarchy and its resulting inequality. Studies on the occupational status. It has been seen that though the stratification on the basis of status depends mostly on an economic factor, the stratification on the basis of class purely depends on the economic factor. With classification based on class, we have the problem of false class consciousness when people identify with the wrong class. However, many attempts have been made to study the society on the basis of status, as it is seen that many occupation has differential status. Many studies have been done on the assumption that certain occupation carried a differential status. These studies collectively have come to known as studies on occupational prestige. We can take into account the study done by Hall and Jones during 1950. It is the best known study that has been ever done on social grading. These two sociologists asked 1400 people to list 30 occupations according to their social grading. They tried to conceive a social grading of different occupations in society. There was not much difference in the answers that were received from the interviewers. Michael Young and Peter in 1956 studied the social grading of the manual workers and found that workers tend to grade occupation according to its usefulness to society. Thus, workers placed manual workers above non-manual workers. They found that it was only with the occupations that lied in the center of the list where the difference in judgment occurred. The workers in general had no difference of opinion regarding the occupations that were listed on the top and bottom of the list. However, from the various studies done on occupational status, we were able to understand that occupational status is a factor that decided the socio-economic status of a worker. Occupational status came as a reward attached to the occupation in the form of power, income, and educational requirements. In the recent past, it has been accepted that occupational status is a major indicator of socio-economic position of a worker. Many studies were further done on occupational prestige and status to understand its importance by scholars all over the world. Studies showed that there were many other factors which got reflected through occupational status. First, since occupational status was the outcome of skill attainment, it provided information regarding a person's skill and knowledge, and further gave us idea about his monetary rewards and social position. There were also studies made on occupational prestige which reflected the tendency among people of rating a job according to its worthiness. The term prestige indicated the amount of respect few occupations held in the society. Today, sociologists has been able to study more than 700 occupations from surveys conducted in different nations to understand how occupational status work. In America, studies on occupational status began during 1947 when National Opinion Research Center conducted a survey regarding occupational prestige. The result and analysis of the survey was summed up in the socio-economic index developed by Duncan. The survey showed that most people associated prestige with income and education. However, people who belonged to the working class attached a more moral notion to the concept of prestige. They, as seen earlier in the study of Hall and Jones, ranked jobs with higher functional importance to society more than others. As a result, people from working class rated doctors higher than lawyers, though both need equal amount of education and has higher earning. Criticism of studies. These studies on occupational grading were based on the assumption that every occupation could be graded low to high according to their status. However, such forcible distinction looked artificial as workers usually did not make them. Reiss in 1961 claimed that status was a multidimensional phenomenon and every single indicator of status further had many dimensions. The occupational ranking procedures do not highlight all these dimensions. Similarly, status has been found to be only one factor of classifying an occupation. There are many equally relevant factors of classification of an occupation along with status. Morris and Murphy, in their study conducted during 1959, suggested this view. They suggested that status could be used for making a vertical classification, while others, vital factors had to be used to do horizontal classification. They also reflected on the fact that by taking status as a factor of classification, we were able to develop a technique to learn the effects of status. This technique can assess the influence of work and its status on attitude and behavior of worker. This has in turn increased the interest of scholars in sociological studies of an occupation. Status congruency. There are many sources of status, and this can further explain the difference in the judgments of status. Sources may comprise of the rewards that are attached with the job, like economic and social rewards. Status may also come from prestige, authority, and functional importance of an individual. These four sources of status may be harmonious in nature or not. However, when a person occupies a relatively higher status on one ground, he may feel deprived if the same is not the case in some other ground. Such feeling of deprivation leads to a strain of congruence among the four sources of status. It has also been seen that status factor present in work scene has the power to affect non-work scenes as well. Status is usually seen as transferable, thus getting a job with high status can get us entry into an elite club. On the other hand, a low status in occupational life may motivate us to seek higher status in non-work activities. Stratification theory and industry. Theories on social stratification have progressed in a very irregular way. There has been a lot of research on the concepts like how economic inequalities are created, continued and changed, but researchers have failed to explain the interclass variation of ideology and the behavior of people within a class. The British sociologist have been more concerned about practical issues like meaning of work-class affluence. Their theoretical approach was adopted by American sociologists who wanted to explain the cause of stratification. The debates generated by American sociologists usually revolved around theoretical questions such as whether stratification was inevitable in a society. The questions that were taken up by American sociologists have been commendable in focusing the attention of scholars towards the concept of stratification. Here we would study about why stratification is inevitable in a society. Much of the research on this subtopic has been done by the American sociologists. Here we go more close to the philosophy of stratification than its sociology. In 1945, Kingsley Davis and Wilbert forwarded their theory in which they explained the universal necessity of stratification in any social system. They have accepted that different positions in social stratification have important functions which are varied in nature and helps in maintaining the social system. Further, they also noticed that there is a lack of talent and training among the masses. As such, the greater rewards are attached with the positions which are functionally of greater importance. This is done so that only people with talent and skill occupy such functionally important position. To be more precise, what they were suggesting was that certain work with a higher degree of complexity needed specialization, such as the work of a doctor or engineer. As such, an individual needs to go under rigorous phase of training for perfecting such skill. Such jobs, which require a higher degree of expertise, attach greater functional value to them. They are highly significant to society, and the reward earned during those jobs are also high. Thus, social stratification erupts from them and is a complete necessity, and no one can deny it. By giving people attached to such a complex job, we are encouraging them to take such a job and perform to their best level. Rewards like prestige, power and property has to be attached with such job, or we can end up having a society where anybody will take up any job and not render work up to the mark. He believed that functional stratification motivated people to do better. This opinion on social stratification was criticized by Tumin in 1953. He questioned the notion of differential functional importance, which according to him was not an adequate measure to understand social stratification. Further, he argued it was also intuitive with sound rational base. He claimed that stratification restricted the development of talent and skill by taking away whatever opportunity is left with a person. To this criticism, Davis replied, a status is ascribed to an infant because of his parents, who are the socializing agents and have already acquired a status. Such connection of an infant with his parents immediately gives him an assigned position in the social status system. Status of agents, which are defined by race, kinship, citizenship, or religious affiliation, also defines the status of the infant. Further, Davis suggests that there are two types of status, one that is ascribed because of parents, and second, that which can be achieved by skill and talent. But in society, achievements are limited by ascribed status. As per a person's ascription in terms of the role of the family, he may not get hold of necessary opportunities to realize his full potential. Tumin further advanced his criticism of the concept of unequal rewards as being true motivator. He cited the example of intrinsic job satisfaction and social services as other substitute for motivation as opposed to unequal rewards. Similarly, many other scholars came up with their criticism of Davis and Moore's version of stratification of society. Foucault criticized the concept of differential functional importance, saying that it was a false notion. He highlighted that there were no rational basis suggesting that different position of status makes an important contribution to the social system. Further, he criticized Davis' assumption that societies who were purely based on achieved status lasted longer than the societies who were based on ascriptive status. Foucault also validated the other three remaining parts of the theory propounded by Davis and Moore. First, he accepted that the mobility of people to certain lucrative position was based on the unequal rewards attached to such position. Second, he believed that the presence of the social institution called family led to the status ascription of an individual in society. Third, he also accepted that the distribution of talented people is not equal in all levels. There is scarcity of skilled people, and this led to the stratification. Further, this encouraged the attachment of unequal rewards to the position where there is a need of such talented people. Originally, the study made by Davis and Moore to be a study of society's nature. It was meant to explain the structural, functional part of the society. But gradually their research was modified and extended in a way which can help us to understand better the structural feature of society and its member. In reality, division of society into strata is difficult. Stratification in general exists as individuals legitimize the difference in authority and power. In the other sense, we can say that superior position enjoyed by various status of society exist only because people within it give such stratification their consent. To conclude, it has been seen in the discussion that the stratification of society is a feature of social system itself. This concept deals with division of people into groups with shared economic and social circumstances. When the difference in the measure of power, authority, income and recognition increases, a gulf among groups are created, which is termed as a social stratification of the social system. Through social stratification, society places people into different hierarchical levels according to their talent or acquired status. This stratification also passes from one generation to other. Further, we have learned that social stratification is universally existent, and finally it is based on the consent of the majority. In industrial society, stratification is seen in a broader perspective. This is done when we simply divide the society into two classes. However, when we take the status into account, the study becomes more open-ended. We are able to analyze each component of society that plays a role in social stratification. Stratification can also be classified by kinship ties, caste, and religious affiliation. As Weber puts it, status class is based on prestige, honor, and other variables, while social class depends on the economic factor. From all the above given studies and criticism, it is clear that stratification is based on class and status. While class deals with material wealth, status can be acquired from parents, obtained due to achievement, and enhanced with continuous achievement. Also, it has been studied that status comes from the reward that are attached to some important jobs or occupations that we do. Thus, occupation, education, and income are important factors in understanding a person's status. So is his kinship ties. But status mostly exists due to acceptance of it. We give consent to the authority, which leads to stratification.